So we have a pretty odd update around Cyberpunk 2077 today. Just recently, there was this leak posted on 4chan, already a huge red flag as far as leaks go, that describes some of the things coming in Cyberpunk's future. Some of the major additions with the patch 1.5 update, the vision for the game overall, and even some of the things potentially planned for the first expansion. This leak got pretty popular, I think, because a lot of this content sounds really good and exciting, a lot of cool new features people have been wanting. But then following the leak, following it doing some of the rounds, we had a follow-up by CDPR's global PR director on Twitter saying this thing does not add up. This is in response to one of the people to create an article on this leak, to which we saw a ton of other articles or coverage on this talking about how this leak is fake and is debunked. But I'm actually going to go against the grain and say, no, it's kind of not. And it's a super interesting or odd situation with this leak, because it seems some of what this leak is saying is actually true. And even further, I think the PR director's response here, this thing does not add up, actually does kind of justify that. He's not saying it's outright fake, he's saying that some of it was fake, or all of this doesn't add up to be a genuine leak. And I'll explain why that is the case here, as this leak is actually super interesting and a pretty good insight into at least some of what we're getting in the future. In the past, to be clear, CDPR has actually outright denied leaks at face value and responded to them, although it is still pretty scarce. So with that in mind, let's look at what this leak is actually saying. They say the Cyberpunk Next Gen / patch 1.5 will be treated as a soft relaunch for the game. Game will be renamed to Cyberpunk 2077 Samurai Edition. Patch 1.5 and the next gen version being a soft relaunch actually just makes a lot of sense. You've been listening to the earnings calls with CD Projekt Red. They have talked or alluded to this without saying it too explicitly. And even further, just the gap in between updates makes it pretty clear they're investing a lot of time, like 4, 5, potentially even 6 months of time into this one update. This while the game has only been out just over a year now. The leaker says CDPR will do a big live stream around February to reveal the patch, the Cyberpunk anime, and the first expansion. This too, not super crazy. They did do a live stream with patch 1.3. That was a while ago now in August, but that was also the last major patch. Them doing that again with the next major patch, patch 1.5, does seem plausible. Them talking about the anime and first expansion does seem less likely, but we do know that this is all coming at some point in Q1. We only really have like 86 days left of Q1, so they kind of have to let us know relatively soon, you would think, unless they just surprise drop the biggest update ever and next gen version one day. Then where things start to get very interesting. He talks about new features and the promise-free DLC, saying how the promise-free DLC will be bundled in, includes 4 new weapons, new game plus, apartment customization, new gigs, and how the new patch features barbershops, a garage, improved AI, transmog system, a complete rebalance of the loot system, new UI. And it seems basically confirmed that at least part of all of that is true. Cyberpunk has had several DLC leaks at this point, one of them being around the Epic Game Store that seems like it was completely fabricated, not true in the slightest, but then a separate one was just a list of several DLC names, 17 in particular, that was data mined from the game. 3 of those items match up extremely closely with the DLC we actually got with patch 1.3. Yeah, remember when we got that jacket DLC, the car DLC, and the stylish new look for Johnny Silverhand? Well, from that original data mine, we find DLC 5 jackets, DLC 11 J look for Johnny look, and DLC 4 Quartz, which is the name of the new car. So it seems like this entire list of 17 items, although potentially outdated now, is actually true. So some of the other notable entries here that come to mind, we do have DLC 15 NG Plus, so New Game Plus coming. Not a super surprising one, this is how it worked for The Witcher, but it seems very, very likely that New Game Plus will ship with patch 1.5 since there'll be a huge influx of people returning to the game. DLC 6 Apartment, seems like apartment customization of some kind, or perhaps one skin for an apartment. There's a bunch of mods that do this for Cyberpunk right now on PC, where you could basically just change the way your apartment looks by downloading this mod, almost like a skin pack or visual overhaul of the apartment. DLC 8 Mirror could very likely be that transmog system, being able to actually change the way your character looks. There's 4 entries titled things like SWP, PWP, etc. Each of these 4 names do closely match up with the 4 categories of weapons, so there'll probably be 4 new weapons added at some point in 4 separate DLCs, as well as in a similar vein, there are several names to these DLCs that are areas of the map. Many people speculating these will actually be gigs in the game, so 1 new gig in that area of the map, and then things like a monster DLC, which I have no idea what that is, still super ominous. So for at least some of those things, it does seem all but confirmed they are in fact coming. Not necessarily a full-on garage, improved AI, or a rebalance of the loot system, but new weapons, some kind of apartment customization, likely just an alternate look for the apartment, as well as New Game Plus seem all but confirmed, considering the past aspects of this DLC leak did end up being true. He also talks about tons of small stuff like Judy and Panam sending you more text messages during the course of the game. This too was data mined from the game. We actually found this in the files during patch 1.2. I'll have a link to several of these posts down below. They were added to the game with patch 1.2, not there originally. There's lots of additional texting back and forth. It ties in with some of the existing quests in the game, so it seems like the idea with this was you would just get more text during an existing playthrough. So for example, right after the Evelyn Parker questline, Panam would text you around that. You talk to Panam about things like Jackie and your relationship with him, always having one another. That being you and Panam, not you and Jackie. Panam sending V a hot photo. Panam getting jealous of Judy and V's relationship with her. Some talk about pierogies, among a ton more. Again, links down below if you're interested. So this texting back and forth and perhaps a bit of an expansion on the romance aspect of the game definitely seems planned, and all of this is super old now. These data mines being from April 2021, so of course this could have been changed, but also it could have been way expanded also. They describe how the first expansion takes place in Pacifica, which is actually quite huge. You walk around and do quests in what is called the Combat Zone. The Combat Zone is being fought over by two new gangs, the Bozos, violent clown psychopaths with a sick sense of humor, and a gang called Slaughterhouse, violent psychopath fascists. Walking around here feels very inspired by the game Stalker. So the two gangs, the Bozos and Slaughterhouse, straight out of Cyberpunk lore. Nothing crazy going on there. It's literally just pulling from the lore. The first expansion being in Pacifica and in a place called the Combat Zone, though, is also backed up by data mines. Are you noticing a theme here? Mentions of a combat zone are found dating to when patch 1.2 was added to the game. The combat zone isn't so much of a singular place as an idea in Cyberpunk lore. It's basically a lawless area in Cyberpunk, and cops don't even bother going there. It's kind of just all out chaos. In Cyberpunk 2077, Pacifica is the combat zone, but the way it's worded around some of these quests or the entries found in the files, it seems like perhaps the combat zone could become a more defined area in the future. We hear about how an unfinished church was repurposed for new arrivals in CZ, that likely being combat zone, new entries around Mr. Hands, the Pacifica Fixer, and even just on paper, if you look at the world, this all makes sense because there is a rather large portion of Pacifica that's just completely walled off. Seems like there's a lot of potential there. And again, even though there's not much to go off of, we have seen new entries and new quests around Mr. Hands, Pacifica, and mentions of CZ, which is seemingly combat zone. As far as the gameplay aspects of this leak, that is completely unfounded, no data mines to back that up, but considering what a combat zone is in Cyberpunk lore, it being a bit wilder and a bit unsafe there, that makes sense. Leaker does say Cyberpunk will get its own Gwent-like minigame. It involves going to cyberspace and controlling and collecting a monster, which you can send to JRPG-like battles. Also has multiplayer. One of the monsters looks like a Reaper, another one I saw looks like an Ani. The Cyberpunk developers have actually talked about this somewhat in the past. A year and a half ago, they did a podcast with GameStar, which is a German media outlet. The podcast itself actually being in German, and what they say is, and especially what will be possible in this cyberspace when it comes to depth and features, because the cyberspace in 2020, that being Cyberpunk 2020, the tabletop game, is actually a bit like Skyrim meets Tron. There are weapons like a fantasy RPG. Like you can summon a Lick with a cape who burns the evil hacker. Yes, he scorches his brain, the hacker falls over, and you could throw fireballs and block them with shields. So it sounds actually like in a fantasy RPG in a high-tech environment. It seems like here they weren't talking specifically about Cyberpunk 2077 overall. Naturally, that is not a feature of the game, but really a Cyberpunk lore and the Cyberpunk concepts on a high level. The things possible in the universe and in the cyberspace based off the established lore from the past Cyberpunk games before 2077. And of course, they are working on multiplayer. The cyberspace is a thing. They obviously were aware of this lore during development, so is it going to be a feature? Who knows? This one definitely isn't as concrete, no data mines around it, but it is interesting. And the rest of the leak is just random things, like things about the anime, as well as the Cyberpunk second expansion being in its early stages, and it may not come out at all. So taking this all together, it kind of is an interesting situation in what I think somebody more or less did did is take a bunch of past data mines around Cyberpunk and potentially even looking at an old interview that was fairly obscure. Like, there were some headlines about that cyberspace minigame at the time. That interview was from mid 2020, but I don't think that was popular knowledge. I wasn't actually aware of it before this video, but more or less compiled past information from some interviews, most notably some from data mines, some from the leaks that did occur, and then basically made a leak that is a combination of data mine information, leaked information, and then also just some random wishlist stuff that they hope happens. So returning to the original comment by the head of PR when he says this doesn't add up, I think it is fair to say that some of this will probably be true. It almost is like a highlight reel of some of the most notable data mines of the past year with this game, which is kind of what this video turned into, just highlighting some of the past data mines with Cyberpunk that I'm sure you remember some, maybe you forgot about others. I even forgot about some of these, and I made entire videos on them. It is worth considering a lot of this data mine information is really old. Patch 1.2 mentioned a lot, that being from mid to early 2021. So the leak itself is probably fake, but that doesn't mean it didn't get certain things right. One other piece of news I do want to mention is Cyberpunk was also just voted as the top story-rich game with the Steam Awards. Didn't have necessarily the hardest competition, but it's a big win overall and definitely nice to see it. It's yet another data point to look at with how the sentiment around this game has really started to turn around over the past few months. If you look at the Steam player count chart, it is extremely telling. I feel like most of the time when we take a look at games that kind of have a spike in players due to a big sale after their initial release, it falters pretty quickly, but for several months now, Cyberpunk 2077 has been gaining players. And with a new big update around the corner, and I'm sure a lot of people who have already beat the game or bought it at launch coming back, I can't imagine this is going to be coming to a halt anytime soon. With 86 days left in Q1 2022, at least when this video is uploaded, we should hopefully be hearing about the next gen version as well as the next big update relatively soon. I will definitely be covering it. Hopefully in the coming weeks to a month or so, CDPR will share some information. But in the meantime, if you are enjoying Cyberpunk and looking for more content around the game, I did just recently post a video looking at some of the great quality of life styled mods for it. Somebody just add working trains to the game, absolutely incredible mod, as well as a ton of other great ones to come out relatively recently. With that said, if you do want to get subscribed, I'm going to have yet another mod video coming relatively soon. But with that, I thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.